Coming up this week, I get reacquainted with survival horror prequel Resident Evil 0. John gets all reanimated about the undead, and then you kill them. And that's good. Aoife goes full Darwin as she charts the evolution of horror gaming, and the shambling brain munchers groan about the state of Resident Evil. That's Zombie for Welcome to Videogame Nation. Resident Evil is a series in trouble. Much like its cast of reanimated corpses, it's become a shambling, brainless, directionless mess, desperately groping around in a world it can no longer comprehend. Alright, maybe that's a little harsh, but I think we can all agree that Resident Evil 6 was about as divorced from Resident Evil as Donald Trump is from reality. It's a pretty sad state of affairs when a spin-off series, the surprisingly good Resident Evil Revelations, is truer to the spirit of the franchise than a main entry. It's starting to look as though Capcom might feel the same way too. Last year we were treated to a HD remaster of the 2002 remaster of the original Resident Evil. It wasn't a particularly accomplished nor a particularly necessary upgrade, but it certainly felt like a statement of intent. Then came the news that Capcom was finally pandering to fan demand and producing a full-blown remake of Resident Evil 2, considered by most, myself included, to be the high point of the traditional Resi games. Are we to take these offerings as a sign that when Resident Evil 7, or better, a total reboot of the series finally rolls around, we'll see a return to genuine chills rather than gung-ho thrills? Adding more rumour fuel to the speculation fire is the unexpected and, dare I say it, unrequested HD remaster of the GameCube exclusive prequel, Resident Evil 0. It's an obvious choice in some ways. The original game had a fairly limited audience, and it shares the same visual style as the GameCube era Resident Evil, making it an easier touch-up job than Resident Evils 3 or Code Veronica. But it's also a peculiar choice because it also represents the death of the traditional Resi experience, the point at which Capcom realised that something had to change and ultimately came back with the triumphant Resident Evil 4. So we have the game that arguably triggered a reinvention for Resident Evil being re-released at a time where Resident Evil is once again in dire need of reinvention. In conclusion, I have no idea what Capcom is thinking. It's not a lazy update by any means. The spruced up environments and characters have been treated with a lot of love and care, particularly the fantastic Orient Express style train location that opens the game. The transition to widescreen has been handled cleverly, and the new lighting does wonders for the ominous atmosphere. And as with the Resident Evil remaster, you can now opt for a more traditional control scheme over the deliberately leaden tank controls of old, which will come as a relief to some folk.
I think the tank controls have their place. I mean, I wouldn't want them for every game, but in Resi, I love it. I mean, they just make the game tense.
Oh, tank controls are hilarious, aren't they? They're just so rubbish. Like, when you play these games now, it's amazing what we used to put up with. And my favourite tank control game was Dino Crisis, because yeah, you'd have like this raptor like coming at you with like bleeding jaws, and you'd be like. It was simultaneously scary and absolutely infuriating.
Like, the tank controls are way too old school. It's like, and they feel so slow and stiff, it feels like your pad is broken. It's like, so go back. No.
No. But I hated them when I was a kid, and I hate them now. I know there's going to be the Dan Mars of the world. They're going to sit and pontificate for hours about how they add to the tension and how, oh no, but it was a serious design choice that made it so much better and so much scary. No, it was just hard to control.
Zero is the first in the series to pair up its protagonists, but unlike Resident Evil 5 and up, this is still a solo-only experience. With some effort, it could have enjoyed a new lease of life as an online co-op adventure, but that might have made the game too interesting. Instead, you've got the so-called partner zapping system to contend with, which lets you switch between Star's rookie Rebecca Chambers and death row fugitive Billy Cohen with a single button press. It was an interesting wrinkle at the time, creating new puzzle-solving opportunities, giving you extra firepower, and allowing collected items to be split across two insanely restrictive inventories. But what it also brings is a lot of time-consuming hassle to a formula that's already notorious for padding out its game's limited length with inventory juggling and endless backtracking. Where Resident Evil 4 transformed item management into a fun game that delighted people like me who treat suitcase packing like a game of Tetris, Zero's inventory juggling often feels more like complete guesswork. You'll rapidly come across more items than your tiny pockets can handle, and while the ability to leave items anywhere is a refreshing inclusion, it's a shame that it's replaced rather than complemented the magic content-sharing chests of previous games. This could have been solved by allowing Rebecca and Billy to trade items at any point, but Zero fussily demands that they have to be in each other's company. Beyond that, there's very little to separate it from previous installments. Once you've made it off the train, which lasts all of an hour, you'll spend the bulk of your time in yet another mansion apparently designed by the same insane architect responsible for all of the others. I mean, how does this guy keep getting work? This mansion contains very few surprises and heavily telegraphs its few scares. A room containing a key item with the sounds of crows cawing outside. I wonder what will happen when I pick that up. You'll spend less time screaming and more time marvelling at how Umbrella managed to train its creatures to act with such impeccable dramatic timing. Even Resi's trademark zombies lack bite, doing little more than materialising in previously empty rooms and corridors, soaking up valuable ammo and leaving you groaning more than they do. Resident Evil 0 isn't necessarily a bad game, but even with the impressive spritz of visual polish, it's undeniably a dated one. Perhaps this is Capcom's way of telling players that the solution to making Resi relevant again isn't necessarily to revisit the past, but rather to learn from its mistakes, or perhaps it's just an easy way to make a quick buck. Either way, this is still the best way for players to experience a curio from the Resident Evil catalogue for the first time, even if that experience isn't an entirely pleasurable one. John will be with you shortly to explore our endless fascination with zombies, more specifically the mass re-killing thereof. But first, let's hear our experts' favourite depictions of The Walking Dead.
I think Left 4 Dead 2, the boomer zombies, because they are just these gigantic, huge, horrific men that when you shoot them, they explode like wonderful zombie gut fireworks. So I'm gonna say the boomer.
I don't really find zombies that scary, to be honest, generally, because they are quite slow moving and they often just look a bit ridiculous and just, you know. So I quite like the zombies in Plants vs Zombies, because that just sort of embraces the ridiculousness of the whole concept. And I like the fact there's like one riding a dolphin and there's the bobsleigh zombies. And I think that sort of fun element makes it a little bit more interesting.
Right, so in the second mission of Metal Slug 3, there are zombies, right? And these zombies spit at you, and if they hit you, you turn into a zombie. And you're an awesome zombie. You're like an immortal, unstoppable zombie who can like take down a helicopter with just this wave of vomit. It's fantastic.
Hello, television friends. High def, high five. Shambling, rotting lumps of flesh desperately hunting for brains. Am I talking about zombies or ISIS? No, it's zombies, given that they're considerably more popular and much less ugly. If video gaming was married, it would be to the humble zombie, the staple enemy that's gnawed our skulls for 32 years, surviving longer than baddies like the Joker on full-body Viagra, and female gang members who Capcom later identified as transgendered because it was Japan in the 1980s and they didn't want people to get offended while they punched ladies in the face. No, seriously, look it up. Zombies are the quiet achiever of video game enemies, and I say enemies because you very rarely play as a zombie. If you wanted to play a game where the controls were sluggish and all you heard was moaning, you'd just play WWE 2K16 on multiplayer. We know that movies and TV adore the undead, but where does gaming's love of the zombie come from? The first zombie game was Zombie Zombie for the ZX Spectrum, where you and your trusty air rifle must contend with the dead, and also the fact that the game's called Zombie Zombie and not something sensible like Not That. In Zombie Zombie, an ancient relic has been unearthed, unleashing a terrible curse upon the world. Now, magical or voodoo zombies are just about extinct in modern pop culture. For a long time, much more common was the Romero zombie, zombies nicked almost entirely from George A. Romero's Dead films. In 1986, the world got its second zombie game, called Zombie. With a plot and setting lifted entirely from the original Dawn of the Dead, Zombie is you against reanimated corpses.
That's right. In the past, zombies have been corpses brought back from the dead by magic or science, but the modern zombie is just a normal person who's contracted a virus which you must now cure, usually with a chainsaw.
And that's where the love comes from. As graphics got better and mainstream gaming moved inexorably towards 3D, there was a need for an enemy that's scary but faceless, especially once you've blown that face off.
Virus zombies can be anywhere, in any number, for just about any reason.
Demons have to come out of hell. It can't always be the Russians, and vampires are too sexy. If you get a whole bunch of vampires biting humans, that's not a video game, it's a fetish night.
When you're designing enemies, you want them to be colourful enough to be interesting, but just generic enough that the player can kill them without feeling too bad.
Check out the guys in Just Cause 3 wearing masks and sunglasses so you never see their faces, because if you did, you might feel a little bit of what you humans call empathy.
Now apply that to zombies.
Left 4 Dead had its different classes of zombies. Dead Space had that, but in space. And stand still long enough in the Dead Rising games, and you'll see zombies do some very funny stuff indeed. A variety of how they look and what they do, but it's all just interesting enough to keep you watching and alert.
And then you kill them. And that's good.
Personally, I find zombies kind of calming. We've all been stuck in a crowded shopping mall surrounded by families of appalling brain-dead dorks. And zombies are just like them, but at least there's a reason for it. And on another level, zombies are everywhere because we needed a target that was acceptable to fight. GTA gets folks upset because your enemies were mostly just innocent bystanders, and you were bored.
But zombies? Everyone can kill zombies.
We'll be back with you right after the break, but then you already knew that because that's how TV shows have worked for decades, and yet here I am telling you anyway. You know, if this show was American, they just cut straight to commercial without giving you any notice whatsoever.
Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. Big boy game.
This is going to be some Premier League, you know.
Welcome back to the show. That's human for Now, as I mentioned at the top of the show, Resident Evil is suffering from an identity crisis. So how did a series that was once so consistent go so spectacularly off the rails? And how would our chatty-faced experts steer it back on track? Here's how.
I think, you know, the Resident Evil franchise has got a number of key elements that a lot of gamers like. So, you know, it's got that post-apocalyptic sort of element. We like being scared, don't we? That's always quite thrilling. And they're just fun to play. The mechanics are just usually really nicely done.
I think Resident Evil 1 was just the right game at the right time. You know, 1996, this is a point where horror films are on the decline. Games themselves are becoming more mature. The PlayStation as a brand was so important for making games seem more adult. And here comes this horror game, this, you know, genuinely scary, a little bit cheesy, a little bit B-movie, but frightening horror game that felt like it was made for adults.
At the time, when it first came out, I remember playing it at a friend's and it was sort of like, it seemed so adult and cool and scary and like, wow, this isn't Sonic the Hedgehog.
I think it's probably because it started from that kind of B-movie roots where it was like a ridiculous kind of zombie flick, and but as a game. And like the first one really capitalized on that, and it felt that way, like the cheesy dialogue and stuff like that, and that's still there. But like, even though nowadays, like you can, in Resident Evil 6, you can tell they're trying, it's still cheesy. Because like, the actors are good, you can tell the actors are good, but the lines that they have to say is so terrible. It's like...
What happened to Jill and Wesker?
For me, I wasn't super dexterous on the controller, and I found it a little bit hard sometimes to play, but I was always the one who'd solve the puzzles. So it was kind of like you could all like work as a team. So even if I didn't feel like, I didn't want the pressure of ruining someone's game, I'd be like, no, 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 put that weed killer in the thing and the plant will die and you can get to that other area. Yes.
My favourite entry in the Resident Evil series is still the original and best. I will never forget that moment where the wolves come through the window and just absolutely did a wee in my pants, yeah.
Okay, well, 1 for nostalgia, but then 2's probably the better game. 2 was kind of perfection for me. That was the one that really, I loved every single bit of it. The first one was a bit frustrating in the hammy acting, which was kind of funny, but not really funny at the time. But 2.
Why isn't someone doing something about this?
You can't go wrong with Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. Big boy game. It's the best one. Like, I feel sorry for Jill Valentine, because clearly she just come out of a nightclub, so she's dressed that way, and there's a zombie apocalypse there. I know. You have to feel sorry for her, because all she wanted to do is come out the club, get kebab, and get Uber home, and then all of a sudden she's got to deal with a zombie apocalypse.
We have to get out of here.
My favourite entry in the Resident Evil series is Resident Evil 4 because it is the best one, and I cannot imagine why anybody else on this show would have said anything other than Resident Evil 4. If they have, they are wrong and you should fire them.
5 is probably my favourite. I played that online with a friend on the Xbox 360, and we had a ton of fun just sort of laughing at it and slagging it off whilst doing co-op spooky fun missions. I even played a bit of 6, that was alright, it wasn't the worst thing in the world. I stopped after the first campaign, but to be able to play them co-op, fun.
Okay, anyone who doesn't say Resident Evil 1 or 4 is just wrong.
But what I want to see next in the Resident Evil series, I want them to take it down. It's got a bit too Hollywood, it's got a bit too Michael Bay. Take it down, tone it down to like a humble story that turns into something evil.
I'd really like to see a proper HD remake of Resident Evil 4 rather than that awful one that they made a few years ago. It just looked like people had taken photocopies of screenshots of the original game and just stuck them on boxes.
Where's everyone going?
I think just another big blowout entry into the series. Like the sort of smaller ones I've been releasing lately, they're cool, they're a lot of fun. But another massive, ridiculous one. Like, everyone's hated 6, and I finished the Leon campaign and was like, yeah, that's enough. I don't want to do 3 more campaigns. But keep it silly, keep it campy, keep it fun, and just have weird, crazily designed mutants running at me in a ridiculously lavish looking thing. That's what I want. Just another Resident Evil. Resident Evil 7 is what I want. Give me that.
I'd just like to see a good Resident Evil game. Like, it just feels like it's been so long since there was anything good really to say about the franchise. Like, the best people can do is like, oh, you know, Resident Evil Revelations 2 was all right. It's like, no. I want it to feel like when Resident Evil 4 came out and there was just this massive buzz and you knew this was one of the year's big releases. And I feel like there hasn't been for a decade that same buzz around the franchise.
So in Japan, right, they've done Resident Evil the play. So with like real actors like on the stage, you know, with Chris Redfield and all of that, and that's quite cool. But what I'd really like to come to the West End here in London is Resident Evil the musical. Like a whole chorus of zombies, you know, bits dropping off, and you know, but maybe the wolves jump out of the aisles onto the audience. I don't know, I think it'd be amazing.
As we've watched one of the founding fathers of modern horror gaming lose its way over the years, we've also seen plenty of other games leading the genre in terrifying new directions. Here's Aoife to lead you by the hand and take you through the games that take the art of fright to gruesome new heights.
Bizarre murder cases have recently occurred in Raccoon City. There are outlandish reports of families being attacked by a group of about 10 people.
There was a time, roughly around the golden years of the original PlayStation, when survival horror games reigned supreme. Games like Dino Crisis, Silent Hill, Project Zero aka Fatal Frame, and above all else, Resident Evil. They were all anyone wanted to play. They were gory, they were graphically groundbreaking for the time, they were challenging. Have you ever tried to open a police door with a medallion? And they were scary. Sure, their dialogue could be meandering, their plots confusing, their inventory systems maddening, and their gameplay ultimately similar to one another, but people had never really played anything like them before, particularly Resident Evil. There was just something about its remote and totally atmospheric mansion facility that drew players in. Now it's many years later, and even as a Resi fan, it's difficult for me to deny that the series isn't what it once was. And I'm not just talking about the gradual shift from survival horror into something much more action-heavy and bullet-reliant. It's just become quite apparent that there's no real bite to the series, no original or interesting ideas that build upon the original lore and bring it into line with modern gaming appetites, unless you count put more guns in it. The bosses in particular are so uninspired. At this point, it would be a revelation to fight anything that hasn't been mutated by the T-virus. It feels like Capcom are aware of the series' waning relevancy too. What is the frankly quite dire-looking multiplayer shooter Umbrella Corps if not a quick and easy cash grab thanks to the franchise's well-established name? So what's to be done? Well, nothing really. Resi's had its time. I'm not convinced that even if the series were to find its way into the hands of a competent director, it'd be able to toe the line between adherence to the source material and accessibility to new fans. It's a tall order. It almost looked like Silent Hills was going to achieve just that when the PT demo was released and proved to be an amazingly simple and effective horror experience. But then Hideo Kojima left Konami and well, that was that. We're back at square one. But that's okay. If you look past the reboots and remakes and remasters, there are some truly great games out there looking to become next generation's masterpieces. Horror gaming has moved on from its survival horror heyday, and you know what? That's a good thing. One of the best things to happen to the horror genre in recent years is the indie scene. By its nature, horror is a genre that thrives on the unknown, and nothing will kill a horror game's atmosphere faster than repetition. Which is why, traditionally, it's been extremely hard for popular games from well-known studios to keep things scary for the duration of their 20-hour runtime. Huge portions of that can simply be padding leading up to the next scare. Horror works best in concise, concentrated doses, which is why indie games with their shorter runtime and experimental, surreal gameplay and themes are perfectly suited to the genre. In-browser games like Slender the 8 Pages, which people could play in 10 minutes, record or pass on to their friends, proved extremely popular. Horror is also an easier genre to make on a shoestring budget or with a smaller development team, which is why lo-fi franchises like Five Nights at Freddy's could recycle assets and turn out a short game in a remarkably fast time frame, and yet still deliver a creepy experience that fans enjoy. Other, more ambitious indie titles have changed the face of horror gaming forever too. Amnesia: The Dark Descent knew that to feel true fear was to feel entirely vulnerable, and so stuck players in a hostile environment surrounded by enemies with nothing to protect them but their own wits. This has proved very popular with many modern horror titles. The aforementioned PT demo is one, Alien Isolation, Outlast, and Amnesia developer Frictional Games' follow-up Soma are a few more. If there's a lesson to be learned here, it's that simplicity is good, but that's not to say that we don't like something long-winded and a little bit cheesy, just like the horror games of old, every now and again. Sony and Supermassive Games' Until Dawn came as a bit of a pleasant surprise to many people towards the end of last year. It was big budget, with an all-star cast, it was cliché and really quite silly in places. It was littered with jump scares, but crucially, it was something a bit different. So Resident Evil and its like may never be as popular as they were 10, 15, 20 years ago ever again. But that's alright. Horror gaming has never been as diverse, chaotic, or as interesting as it is right now.
What do you think?
Jesus!
This episode's vital signs are reading danger, and we're all out of green herbs. Until next week, stay in touch with us on the official Video Game Nation Facebook page, on Twitter with the hashtag VGN, or find all 4 pieces of the shield emblem. Place those in the shield-shaped relief to open up the crank hole. Use the octagonal-headed crank to drain the fountain. Pick up the diamond key that's at the bottom of the fountain and use that key to open up the room with the giant clock that's missing a hand, and you know what? Facebook and Twitter will do. See you next week.
Someone's going to be leaving with just their bus fare home. Bullseye is at 8 this evening on Challenge.